Let's have a word of prayer. Lord God, thank you so much for giving us this time together, and bless us as we go about looking at your word. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. Amen. All right. We're looking. This is the last one that we're eating. You know, that's kind of sad, isn't it, Sue? Yeah. Well, the nice thing is, though, last one. I think we can probably guilt Joy into bringing food. You know, because we guilted her into bringing mint. I think we can guilt her into bringing food. So you might want to file that away. You know, just. Nothing big. It doesn't have to be elaborate. You know, just something different every week. Okay. All right. And by the way, I had, I always talk about oysters. I had fried oysters. Thanks to Sister Allen. Gave me a little container of oysters.
That was an early Christmas present.
Lightly, a little bit of flour.
Seasoned flour.
Seasoned, that's right.
Seasoned.
Little flour, yes.
I don't know where you get your flour, but it does not come seasoned.
I did it. I seasoned it. A little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper, a little bit of paprika, some garlic powder. Put a little garlic in the pan with the oil.
Sure.
You betcha. Lightly dusted. Yeah. Milk. Put it in flour, then milk, and then flour again. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you better believe it. Nice little crust. That soft, squishy oyster.
It's no longer.
Yeah, that's on the inside. That pre-chewed food is a wonderful thing.
Are you recording this?
Huh?
Are you recording this?
Yes, I am.
You know, the poor people in Kenya don't have anything to eat.
Good guilt.
Well, let me stop it there. Right? Rewind. Okay, so we're talking about the account in the Gospel of Mark from chapter 14 and 15. The moving from the Last Supper or things around it to the cross or to the tomb. And the last quarter we've broken it into fours. And we'll talk a little bit about the resurrection in Mark too. But just as a review, beginning of chapter 14, what happens at the beginning of 14? Mark tells us exactly what he's going to talk about. What does he say at the beginning of 14? Okay, we got Passover coming, right? So everything is going to focus on. What does he say right at the beginning of 14? That sets the scene.
It was 2 days before Passover.
Okay, remember he gives.
The chief priests and the teachers of law had gathered together.
Right, we got 3 stories, right? Right at the beginning of 14. First one, chief priests, teachers of the law, Jewish establishment, the power of the Jewish community. They say what?
They want to get Jesus.
We're going to get
They
him.
want to kill him.
We're going to get him, but this time we're going to kill him. This is what we're going to do. So Mark tells us that, right? Second story. What happens? Anointed by the lady as he's having dinner at Simon the leper, which is not a great nickname. If you're known as Simon the leper, you probably aren't going to have many friends. But he has dinner, and the woman comes and anoints him, and they say, "Oh, you can't do that. Your money, should have spent the money on poor folks." And Jesus says, "This is, anointing for burial." All right, so we got chief priests want to kill him. Story about Jesus being anointed for burial. Third little story. Judas goes and says, "I'm the guy. I'm the guy. I will betray him." Okay? So, again, typical of Mark. This is the way Mark writes. Having 3 little stories. The first and the third kind of connect to, and then you've got a story in the middle that explains really what's going on in the first two. We see the same thing. Jesus is going to cleanse the temple, but that's going to be in the middle of a story about cursing the fig tree. So he curses it, cleanses the temple, then the tree is withered and dies. And he explains it, this is typical Mark, the way Mark structures his story. Okay, so we got that. So we know what's going to happen soon in the next 2 chapters. Now, after he does that, now what story do we enter? Okay, we enter the Last Supper. And what are some of the things that is going on with the Last Supper?
The festival.
Okay, yeah, it's again part of this Passover festival. Okay, what else is going on?
He creates a sort of, I can't think of a word. He creates, with communion, he creates a...
Oh, okay. He has, what he does is he enacts a ritual, right? And what is the ritual he enacts? Communion. Where you got the bread, this is my body. You got the cup, this is the cup sealed by my blood. Recalling a ritual. Remember, Mark is writing this gospel to people who are living 40 years after Jesus. Jesus has been on 40 years. So he's writing to people that are much later in some kind of community. We call it church, although Mark doesn't. He's writing to people in the community that must be doing this. Must be sharing communion. We know they did it early because Paul writes about it in 1 Corinthians. So it's a ritual done by the early church long before Mark writes his gospel. By having Jesus do this at this meal now gives credence and credibility to this ritual that they're already performing. So now, why are we doing this? Well, we're doing this because this is what Jesus did. Okay? And that's part of the story, something the Christians in Mark Church already knew, already believed. All right, so he does that. We've got this ritual that shows his presence. Command, do this after me. That's why we do it. What else is going on at the supper?
And then it gets a little dark.
Yeah, it starts getting a little bit dark. And what is it that's so dark in this story? Okay, somebody's going to betray him. Somebody's going to betray him. Okay. And the response is, are you nuts? We aren't going to do it. We'll die for you. And who is it that articulates it? Who is it that speaks for the group? Peter. Peter said, man, you're kidding me. I will die for you. And Jesus says, yikes. No, not quite. He says, in fact, 3 times you're going to deny me. And Peter says, you don't know me. You don't know me. I am known as the Rock. I am known as the Rock. And the Rock doesn't let anybody down.
Paper covers the rock.
Yeah. Peter the Rock Johnson. That's what we're talking about. So we are not going to be, so Peter says, and Jesus says, you're going to do that. And the other ones say, oh, no, we're not going to do it either. All right, so they stand out that we're not going to betray him. What happens right after the dinner, once he predicts that, and he talks about the shepherd, you strike the shepherd, the sheep run away. No, we're going to sit with you. Yeah. And Jesus say, leave, right? And what's really interesting is, unlike the other Gospels, there's no mention of Judas leaving early. Because the other ones, you had Judas leaving early, so to sort of separate him from the others, Mark doesn't want to do that. Because Judas is one of the 12. What he's doing may be worse than what the other 11 do, but he is one of the 12. All right, so they all leave, right? And where do they go? To the mountains. Okay, they go to Gethsemane, right? And what does all of them go, right? A whole bunch of them. Then Jesus says, okay, Peter and James and John, you come on with me. And what does Jesus say he's going to do?
He's going to pray.
I'm going to pray. And I want you to stay away. I want you to do one thing. Just want you to stay away. You don't have to kill anybody. You don't have to die for me. You just have to stay away. Okay? And they say, you got it. You got it. And Jesus goes off and he starts praying, right? And the prayer is kind of interesting. Because what does Jesus go off and pray? You know something, God? Please, let me out of this. Don't let this cup pass. Because I know bad things are going to happen. I've been predicting. We're going to see, in fact, in what we look at tonight, we may get an indication of what Jesus may have expected to happen. That didn't. and kind of leaves him a little surprised. But either way, it's going to be bad for the Son of Man. It's not going to be a good thing. And he says, I don't want to do it. So let it pass. But he ends it by saying what? But look, it's not about me, it's about you. Okay? So even though I don't want to do it, it's going to be your will. So almost like, help me accept your will, that this is what's going to happen. Now, since these three are the big three, right? Peter, James, and John. So they're sort of like a singing group. Peter, James, and John. They kind of hang out together. They were on the mountain during the Transfiguration. They saw, Moses and Elijah and Jesus and all. So that's sort of the inside group. Two brothers. This is evidently Andrew must have been a younger brother because Peter's always trying to ditch Andrew. So he's hanging out with the two Zebedee boys, James and John, and they're supposed to be staying away, right? And Jesus comes back, and they're sleeping. And he says, what does he say to them? Jeez Louise. Only says it in Greek, says it sounds better. Jeez Louise, why are you sleeping? I didn't ask for a lot, but you can't stay awake. And he says, okay, stay awake now. I'm going to go and pray some more. And what does Mark tell us he does? Same thing. He goes back and says the same thing. So it's not like he goes and prays, let this cup pass from me, but your will, not mine. And then he says, whew, boy, that's a load off. Now I got my focus. Because it says, Mark says he does the same thing. So he goes off and says, I still don't want to do it. But not my will, yours. And he comes back a second time and they are sleeping again. And he says, what is wrong with you guys? And they say, well, we had turkey at the dinner and drank a lot of wine. Should have had that wine at the end. He says, okay, stay awake now. I'm going to go off again. And he prays again and comes back and they are sleeping. But this time Jesus says, now why is it 3? Now we got 3. 3 is perfect number. 3, ancient people love prime numbers. And 3 is one of them. So how many disciples are with him there? 3. How many times does he go to pray? 3. Okay, how many times is Peter going to deny him? 3. How many pieces? Thank you much. Parts to the Trinity do you have? 3.
I know.
3, yes. So he goes. All right, so he and this is getting faster, right? Because he says, okay, guys, now it's going to start happening. And one of the guys evidently wakes up named Judas, and what does Judas do? Betrayed. And what does he do to him? Gives a kiss. And betrayed with a kiss, and all bunch of, like a mob. But in that mob, Mark tells us who's in that mob. Oh, you got Pharisees, you got priests, you got Sadducees, you got big shots, you got a guy who's, just kind of there. But they're all like, and what do they have? What are they carrying?
Clubs.
They're carrying clubs and sticks and brass knuckles, and they're there, and they're gonna arrest him, right?
Right.
They're gonna arrest him, and these brave. Remember, what did the disciples say they're going to do? I'm going to stand. I am willing to die. I want to die for you. Well, one of them proves that he is certainly worthy to trust, because he pulls out his sword and takes a swing at one of the guys getting Jesus, and he gets an ear, gets his ear. And Jesus says, put the sword away, geez Louise. And I think kind of the point is, that this is kind of a futile action. It's not like he's chopping his way through this crowd. Only he gets an ear. That's it, an ear. What do you do with an ear? I mean, gee, you got an ear. So there it is. There's an ear on the ground. Yeah. So they arrest him, and the disciples do what? They hightail it. Well, at least we know 11, because 11 of them take off. In fact, one of them takes off so fast, he leaves his clothes behind. He's running, and they grab him, and whoosh, he is a streak leaving that scene. The first streak. So, what you want to do, ladies, and this is what I would recommend, because you need to visualize this scene. I want you to take any one of the men that are in this group right now, and I want you to visualize them running with no clothes on away.
Look out, Dean.
All right. So, all right. So, yeah. So and of course, that's emphasizing what? What does Mark throw that in? Why does he throw it in?
Just to get detail.
Well, he gives us a little detail of what?
How afraid they were.
Yeah, how frightened they are. Remember, paper is expensive. Anything Mark puts in costs him something. Paper's not available like it is now. It's really precious. So when he puts something into what he's writing, he really wants to put it in. And, an emphasis that these guys are not only, kind of backing off, but, they're running. They're running. When I was teaching school, I never minded breaking up two guys who were fighting. When two guys were fighting, like in the parking lot, I never minded breaking them up. None of my colleagues minded breaking them up. Because when guys fight, they're usually doing what? Come on. And you get in between them, and those guys are doing what? Because they don't want to fight. Now,
Two women.
when two girls are fighting, Lord have mercy. One time, Larry Davis, who was the teacher across the hall, we had to stand in the hall where the kids were going by, and his classroom was across from mine. We were standing there watching the kids. All of a sudden, we see this girl run by, and then we see a bunch of kids running behind her, and so you know what's happening. And so we look down the hall, and there's this girl chasing her. And I'm telling you, have you ever seen either, Sleeping Tiger, Hidden Dragon? Or The Matrix?
Yeah.
That girl was running on the wall. I mean, she was running sideways on the wall. She was jumping through the air. And I'll tell you, she took off. And I mean, she went past 3 or 4 classroom doors, and she landed on that one girl's back. And they were fighting, and hair was flying, and language. Kim has heard a lot of that language in the Merchant Marines. They're fighting, and Larry and I are standing there. We're looking at one another, and he was tall. He played basketball in college, so he was about 6'4", 6'5". And he looks at it, and I look at it, and we're kind of, we're trying to pretend like we're not seeing it. Because nobody wants to, and claws are out, and there's, and so then there's so much going on. We got to go and break it up. And so he goes and he grabs the girl that's being attacked. And I grab the girl who's doing the attacking. And she's crazy. She's just going crazy. And I end up getting her around the waist. And I'll tell you, her feet were off the ground. I was holding her, and her feet were doing like this, and her arms were doing like that. And finally, I had to move her to a stairwell and grab hold it like this with her in the middle, because she was just crazy. These guys didn't even do that. They were running away. All right, so they run away except for one. Who's the one that doesn't run away? Judas. Well, Judas, by Mark, he runs away. Peter doesn't run away. What does Peter do? He kind of follows behind, right? And so Peter's following behind. And where do they take Jesus? Take him to the high priest, to the council. What do they do to him in the council?
They give him a trial.
They give him a trial. They want to convict him. What's the problem? What does Mark say is the problem in the trial?
There was all
He doesn't speak.
He doesn't speak, but there's a bunch, other people do. And the trouble with the people, well, he did this, he did that. What's the problem with the people who are speaking? Well, two problems. Nobody's telling the same story, and all the stories are lies. All of them are lies. And Jesus never responds. He never says, oh, well, that's stupid. Oh, well, he's an idiot. He doesn't do that. He doesn't say a word. He just stands there until the high priest says what?
What do you say?
Well, are you... Go ahead. Are you... Where he says, are you the Messiah, the Son of God? And Jesus says, I am. Which like I said, I think is irony. As Mark is writing, there's a little bit of irony, because the reader hears that, and all of a sudden we understand in Greek grammar it could just be, for the Greeks it would just be I am, like I myself am. But for a Jewish Greek person, it would have greater meaning. So he says that we know that he is telling the truth. He's Son of God. And the chief priests say, okay, now we got him. This is what we wanted to hear. That he's Son of God. The only problem is they don't want to be the ones killing him. Right? Well, bigger problem, because the early church, the church knows that Jesus is going to be hung on the cross, right? Well, did Jews kill people on crosses? Heck no. They kill people by stoning. Right? So crosses, Romans are going to get. So they then haul Jesus where? Got to see Pilate. Going to take him to see Pilate. Now, in the meantime, who's following in the darkness? Peter's following in the darkness. And he's warming himself by the trash can that they're burning. And somebody says,
You were with them.
yeah, I kind of recognize you. You were kind of with him. And Peter says, oh, no.
That's
No.
okay.
And then somebody else says,
Yes.
yeah, I think I saw you with him. And Peter says,
No.
heck no, you didn't see me with him. And somebody else says, well, you talk funny. You got an accent. And so you must have been with him. Because, these guys were, different. And you got a Galilean accent. And Peter says, I'll give you an accent. And he starts what?
Fight.
He starts cussing and acting foolish and that kind of stuff. And as he's doing that, what does he hear?
Rooster crow.
Rooster crow. Okay? And he says, he said that would happen. And so Peter does what? He starts crying and kind of slinks off into the shadows. Now understand, in the story, Peter is gone. Judas is gone. They never reappear. Judas never reappears. Peter never reappears. These other disciples never reappear. They're gone. He is exiting stage right. Doesn't show up again. All right, so now we got Jesus. We got Jesus before Pilate. What happens with Jesus and Pilate?
Jesus.
No.
Now, we said you got this problem, right? With Jesus is going to be hung on a Roman cross, which means he had to have done something to take the Romans off, particularly Pilate, because Pilate's a jerk and they're going to do what Jews want. And so he's got to do, but the church doesn't want to put the blame for the crucifixion on the Romans. They don't. It's not the fault of the Romans. Don't hate a Roman. You know, the fault is on the Jews. Well, in Mark, the Jewish leadership. Because we're not at a point where they're on one group called the Jews. That comes with John. That's what John says. But we're still talking about the leadership, right? Okay, so goes to Pilate, and as Pilate's talking to him, what happens in the conversation?
Well, they can release one.
Okay. Yeah, he ends up saying something to, well, you king of the Jews. And Jesus says,
I am who you say.
well, yeah, that's what you said. That's what you say. You know, which isn't really an answer. And Pilate must have thought, man, that's pretty slick. Because Pilate wants to let him go, right? Pilate wants to let him go. And there is a custom that somebody's going to be released. Now, you got Jesus standing there. And you got a guy named Barabbas. And Barabbas is, like I said last time, his name is suspicious. Because Barabbas means son of a father, you know, which is kind of that's kind of an odd name. So here we got Barabbas here. And so they say, okay, and Barabbas, how is he presented? He is a bad man. Barabbas is a bad man. He's a murderer. He's a thief. He's rebellious. You know.
Someone said that the other day.
Oh yeah.
They said, Henry, you look like Barabbas.
There you go. So he's a lot like Henry. He's the kind of guy that when he's in like a grocery store and they say take one, Barabbas takes a big old handful, shoves it in his pockets for later. All right, so Barabbas is a bad man, and Mark tells us he's a bad man, and they say Pilate says, well, behind curtain number 1 is Jesus, behind curtain number 2 is Barabbas. Who do you want? And it says, who says we want Barabbas?
The crowd.
The crowd. And like I said last week, I think that's a big deal. Because in Greek, the word for crowd is aklos. And the aklos, the crowd was there. We encountered them early in the Gospel of Mark. They were the ones that were following him around. Never showed faith. But you know, the Jewish leadership, the Pharisees and the scribes and all, it says in Mark, they were afraid of the crowd. You know, early on in Mark, you know, they were afraid of it. So they didn't want to confront him because they were afraid of the crowd. Because the crowd was always in the background. But the crowd hadn't taken a stand yet, right? They were just there. They were eating free food. They were listening to good stories. They were getting their sick folk healed. But they hadn't taken a stand. They didn't really understand who Jesus was. And so they're always in this background. Now the crowd takes a stand. And what is the stand the crowd takes? Free Barabbas, crucify Jesus. So if there's any doubt that the crowd is somehow, you can count on them, they're going to show up and they won't save it. Because remember, the leadership was always scared of the crowd. You know, they ain't scared of the crowd anymore. In fact, they're able to manipulate the crowd. You know, and the crowd ends up doing what they want it to do. So the crowd is kind of taking its position. And they want Jesus going. Now, to this point, what's happened? Who does Jesus have left? Nobody. Because the disciples have done what? Run away. The leadership rejected him early on. By the second chapter, they rejected him of Mark. The disciples betray him, deny him, run away. They've let him down. The crowd now is sort of the last hope is the crowd's going to say, now wait a minute. This is the guy that fed us when we were hungry. This guy that healed our sick, you know, cast out demons. You know, we don't think he's the Son of God, but you don't kill him. You know, the last hope is the crowd may be what the leadership feared it was going to be, and now the crowd has turned on him. And they say, crucify him. And not only do they say crucify him once, they say it again and again. Okay, again and again. Yep. So, Pilate says, okie dokie. Only he said it in Latin. He says, okie dokie. We're to turn him over. Right? Well, yeah. Now, we get this thing of, Pilate calls out a guy and he washes his hands. Right? Do we see this in Mark? No, it doesn't see it. Now, when you've got Pilate washing his hands, what does that show? What would that show? He is really not responsible. So what we see is in the later Gospels that we've got the later writers want to separate the Romans from responsibility even more than Mark, which is the first Gospel. So the later Gospels, we've got Pilate washing. It's not me. Remember in Matthew, the Jews say his blood is on our head and on the heads of our children. Don't say that in Mark. Don't need to say that in Mark. So it's stronger in the other Gospels that it is the blame of the Jews. By the time you get to John, you ain't even talking about crowds anymore. You're talking about the Jews. And the Jews function as a unit. The Jews believe the same thing. The Jews do the same thing. It's like a block. And by the time we get to the Gospel of John, we're looking at a different situation in the early church. Different situation. Okay, but here, Jesus has been abandoned. What does Pilate end up doing? Free Barabbas and send Jesus to be, before he's going to be crucified, though. Yes, that's right. Turns him over to the guards, and they're going to whip him, they're going to scourge him. Now remember, when we looked at Luke doesn't mention that Jesus was scourged. Because again, Luke wants the Romans, he's the one that wants the Romans presented in the best possible light. Because the church is functioning in a Roman world. So he doesn't even get beaten by the Romans. But you do in Mark, this scourge. Now, scourging is really bad, but we're going to see right here in how Pilate reacts later. They don't want to kill anybody by scourging. The Romans do not want you to die as a result of the beating. Because why are they crucifying? Why do they crucify people? They want you to suffer. People talk about, we need this. Capital punishment is a deterrent. Well, you know something? I got to tell you. If I had the choice to be put down or to live the rest of my life in a maximum security prison with an inmate named Bubba, put me down. That's in a humane and painless way. I don't want to live the other way. That's not life to me. I'd rather check out now. If you give me the choice, I'd rather do that now. The Romans, because capital is it, we don't want people to suffer, right? And so it's a deterrent that doesn't involve suffering. We could thank the French for that. The guillotine was sort of, we think, that's horrible. But actually, the guillotine is probably more humane than lethal injection. Because I'll tell you, when the head is rolling, there ain't much life left.
Well, they say now the head keeps
Stays alive for
like
about
30
5
seconds.
minutes.
Well, I thought it was 30 seconds.
Something like that.
Well-
It actually, the eyes blink and everything.
Well, for some people, that's the only way to get ahead in life. Oh, man. All right. So, anyway, but the Romans did not want you to die quickly. We'll talk about that in a minute. So, they're gonna beat him, but they do some things that the reader sees as really ironic. Because here at the end, Mark is working a lot of irony into it, right? Because what do the guards do?
They take their arms down.
They dress him like a king. Put purple robe on him,
The
crown, but his crown is made of thorns. That's going to be a little later when Pilate has him crucified. But they pretend like they're worshiping him, but they're making fun of him. Now we, the reader, though, this is irony, right? Should he have a robe?
Yeah.
Yeah, because he's king. Should he have a crown?
Yeah.
Yeah. Should people be worshiping him? Yeah. But they're doing it in a mocking way. But we, the reader, know that what they're doing is appropriate in a distorted and perverted way. Okay, that's what irony is. All right, so they do that. Then they take the stuff off of him. They move him to the hill, and they have somebody do what? Carry the cross. Now again, part of this carrying the cross business is they don't want Jesus to die in the street carrying this cross. They don't want that. If he dies in the street, then it was really quick. Nobody's going to be deterred by that. It's a rough world. People die all the time. This is going to be a grisly death. So it's not going to be, the Romans don't want it to be easy. This is a death that they reserve for the really bad, the ones who mess with the state. This isn't for everybody. They're not crucifying horse thieves. If you mess with the state, this is what happens to you. Okay, so they take him. Now, as we get into what we're looking at, the 22nd verse, where do they take him? Okay, a place called Golgotha, which means Skull Hill. And where would this have been? Why would they call it the skull? Why would they call this hill the skull? Yeah, that's where they crucify people. This is where they do it. Now, where is Skull Hill? Where is it? Right outside the gate. Why is it right outside the city gate? As your people were going in and out of the city, you saw what? What happened when you mess with the Romans? This is what happens. This is what happens. And maybe it gets you to start thinking a little bit. All right, so that's where they take him. What do they give him? Right, immediately, what do they give him? They give him a mixture of wine and some kind of gall. What are they giving him? They're giving him opium, is what they're giving him. They're giving him something to do what? Yes, to kill the pagan, some of the pagan. They don't want, because the Romans have done this enough, what do the Romans not want to see their victims? They don't want to see them go into shock. They don't want to see them go into shock. Because if you go into shock, what happens? You die. So they give him something to deaden the pain. Because it's not going to be the pain of the nails. The Romans don't care about that. It's the pain of the next 5-6 days as you're up on a cross. That's what they want to, that's what they're focused on. All right, so they give him a little bit. This is very historical. They give him this, but he what? He won't drink it. Okay, why won't he drink it? Okay, because he is going to die in his humanity. He's going to do it. Now understand, I think even then he has expectations. This is not going well, and he knows it, but he has expectations of what's going to happen. We're going to see that a little bit later. So what happens to Jesus? Okay, it says, and 24, I find this fascinating. They nailed Jesus to a cross and gambled to see who was going to have his clothes. Now, if we were, did anybody see, I haven't seen it. I've just seen clips of it. The Passion of the Christ.
Oh, it's on.
Okay, Passion of the Christ. Well, Passion of the Christ, when they're doing most movies that involve crucifixion of Jesus, and they get to this point, you got a lot of focus on boom, boom, hammering the nails, boom, boom, hammering the nails. The scourging, 5 minutes of flesh flying in the air. As Mark describes it, does he describe, and the soldiers took the nails and they drove it through his head? How does Mark describe the Jesus being crucified? They nailed Jesus to a cross, that's it. That's it. Why? I mean, he could have gone into huge detail here. You know, what does that tell you about what Mark is emphasizing or not emphasizing?
Wasn't too much of a big deal on telling details.
Yes, he is not going to go into a lot of detail about this kind of suffering, because this isn't the ultimate suffering.
That happens every day in their life.
Well, you know, it really does. And I've heard people saying you want to be real careful about this. Real careful. You know, people that have seen the Passion, oh, Jesus suffered like no man ever suffered. Well, baloney. Baloney. This was done enough. You know, after Spartacus rebelled, the Romans crucified just like this 3,000 slaves. Just like this. No, this was not easy or hard. 3,000 slaves. Because if you screw with the Roman government, bad things happen. You know, and they put them on the road going right into it. Bad things happen. So you're right, Miranda. This is something that happened. And Mark doesn't want us to focus on that. Oh my gosh, the physical suffering. Because you know something? A lot of people physically suffer. This isn't where Jesus is going to endure the greatest pain. He's going to endure pain here, but it's not the deepest pain. Okay, so they crucify him, divide up his clothes. That has links to the Old Testament. What happens at about 9 o'clock? Okay, down to the cross. Okay. And above him is put a sign. What's the sign that's put above him?
King of the Jews.
Okay, King of the Jews. Now, my goodness gracious, we got irony again, right? Because the sign put it above it, and the other Gospels go into more detail. You know, Pilate wanted to do it, but the Jews didn't want it done. And, you know, but Mark isn't going to deal. He doesn't want to deal with that. That's not important to Mark. You know what? But how is this ironic? Because he truly is. You know, this is accurate. But the people who nailed it there certainly don't believe it. Okay, what happens around it? Well, what happens around it? Right now, he's up on a cross, and y'all know.
Not falling on their
Okay, they gamble for his clothes. Now, y'all know what happens when they're crucified. When a person is crucified, they don't drive nails through the hands. That would be stupid, because if you drive nails through the hands, you slide. Well, the weight would cause it to just slide off. You know, because there's nothing keeping it there. So they nailed it through the wrist. You know, you didn't want the person up there on the cross to slide down. You know, so not even nailing feet, you know, the person would slide down. So they had a little thing to stand on and a little seat. So you could they were sort of, the weight was resting on the seat. They tie you across your chest because they didn't want you to lean forward, you'd suffocate. If you lean passed out, leaning forward, the lungs would compress and you'd suffocate. So they don't want that to happen. You know, they would tie your arms because they wanted to make sure you had plenty of support. The goal was to keep you up there, right? Okay. And you wouldn't bleed out, you know, when they drove the nails. So you were up there on the cross. And the goal was to do what? You would be there for a long time. You'd be there for days. And you know, we even see here, they'll give you something to drink because they don't want you to dehydrate. That's too fast. They want you to be up there for a while. And as you're up there for a while, what's happening to you?
You're slowly dying.
Okay, you're slowly dying. And as you slowly die, what's happening? As you're up there on the cross. Yes, little birds are flying by. Yeah, pecking out whatever they wanted. Bugs are crawling anywhere they want because you can't do anything about it, right? So this is going to be a very unpleasant thing. And after you die up there, the Romans would do what? Leave you up there. Because what they wanted you to do, even after you were dead, you know, when people coming into the city saw, yeah, you thought twice before you did anything against the Roman government. You know, because the Romans meant business. Good night, we were doing this, but in Western Europe, we were doing this like 200 years ago. That's where they would put heads, on pikes at the gates of the city, when there was a rebellion. That was a reminder, you mess with, you mess with us, bad things happen, right? All right, so he's up there. Now, who surrounds him? Now, we would expect, and if we look at like Luke or we look at John, who surrounds him? Disciples, Mary's there, they're crying and all. In here, who surrounds him? Two criminals. And you see paintings or pictures, and Jesus is nailed and the criminals are tied up there, Somehow it looks like their suffering is a little... these other two guys, they went through the same thing Jesus went through. They're being crucified too. They got nails being driven through their wrists. Same thing. Now, Mark doesn't have the story that Luke has about one of the criminals mocking him and the other one not. That's not in Luke. That's something unique in the Gospel of Luke. It's not in Mark. Matthew doesn't have it. Only in Luke. In Mark, all we have are the two criminals mentioned. So what is Mark doing by just having that Jesus dies with two criminals?
Making him more alone.
Making him more, sure. I think that's exactly right. Making him more alone and again, human. So he's suffering and dying with two other people. Okay. So, what happens as people pass by? Okay, they're saying terrible things about him, but Mark uses that to do what? How does Mark use their mocking? Okay, but Mark brings up, as they mock him, little bits and pieces of the story. You said you tear the temple down. 3 days it causes it to rise up. That came up at the time. I remember that. So brings up these little bits and pieces. You saved others. Why don't you save yourself? Oh yeah, Jesus did save others. So Mark is kind of giving us little bits and pieces of things that Jesus did, talked about earlier on. Only these guys are doing what? Doing it in a mocking way, right? And what do the leaders do? They make fun of him, right? And they even say what? This is unbelievable. They say what? As for us, the reader, and we're hearing this, remember? The Jewish leaders, the ones who said, crucify him, what do they say? They make a remarkable statement.
Let the Christ, the King of Israel, descend now from the cross that we may see and believe.
Yeah, they say that. Irony again, because that's exactly who he is, right? Even before they say that, they say what?
He saved others.
He saved others.
You can't save yourself.
But they say they're recognizing what? Well, that's what their point is. Well, yeah, he can't save himself. But they say what? He saved others. They're acknowledging what?
That he did it.
That he did it. They're acknowledging that he did it. They think they're sticking it to it. We the reader pick up on that. Yeah, he did save others. They're right. They're doing it to mock him. But he did do it. And these were his arch enemies. Okay, so all of this stuff that's being said means something to the reader, right? Because Mark is telling us a story where pieces resonate with us. Okay? And here he is on the cross. And in fact, they make a statement. And Sue, you just said, if he's the Messiah, if he's the Christ, the King of Israel, let him come down from the cross and we will see and believe. Why? Why would they say that?
Should he have power for the city?
Okay, they would show that he had power. Power, sure. A little bit more. You're right. A little bit more.
Needed more proof that he was son.
Okay, true. A little bit more. More specific.
They're mocking him.
True, but we the readers say, ooh.
They do it.
Why would they say, if he comes down from the cross, we'll believe?
Seeing is believing.
Well, seeing is, what would that mean?
That he was
If he is the Christ, if he is the Messiah, what would coming down from the cross mean?
Well, that means
That he was the Son of God, for sure.
Everything that he
And why would the coming down from the cross?
Well, then that means a new era.
That's it. That was the whole expectation about the Messiah, right? What was the Messiah, the Christ, supposed to do? This one who was coming.
Change the world.
Change the world, save Israel. Man, if he is on that cross, a Roman cross, but all of a sudden he comes down off that cross, he is what? The one who is going to liberate Israel. Now, they say it in a mocking way, right? We, the readers, say, oh, I hadn't really thought about that. So they don't expect that, right?
Well,
But there's an irony in what they say.
that maybe they did.
Well, we'll get it a little bit later. Some people must have expected it. Because a little bit later,
Nicodemus was a follower.
well, a little bit later, even in Mark, we're going to see that some people must have expected it. Even the two people at the cross do what? They're being crucified with him. What do? They mock it too. So Jesus is there. He's being mocked by other people who are being crucified. Jeez Louise, that's really bad. There's not even a sympathy towards, they're sharing this. Their destiny is the same as his. They're not going to cut those guys loose, take them down and let them go. They're going to die on a cross just like Jesus, and they're mocking. Therefore, who is with him? Nobody. Right? Nobody. What happens about noon? Okay, you got a dark sky. All right? And what does Jesus shout? Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. That's what he shouts. And the fact that it got dark, again, Mark is telling a story. Why does that become meaningful, that it gets dark? Yes, he is alone. Darkness, it seems like darkness is in control. Dark is generally bad. He cries, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, that's Hebrew, it means, my God, why have you forsaken me? My God, why have you abandoned me? Deserted me? Why have you deserted me? Evidently, Jesus expected what? He expected to come down from the cross. Because then he would be the Son of Man. Then he would do exactly what the people expected would happen. Then he would be everybody's expectation of Christ. Instead, he is on the cross, mocked by everybody, and now feels absolutely alone, abandoned by God. In New Testament, and got to be New Testament, the concept of, and we even got into the Middle Ages, the concept of hell is not what we think of. We think of burning, in pitchforks and Saddam Hussein and that kind of jazz. That's a Hitler running around, and that's what we think of as hell. But that's not the way ancient people viewed hell. That wasn't even how Dante viewed hell. When Dante wrote the Inferno, at the core of hell wasn't fire. Has anybody ever seen the Dante's Inferno, that wonderful poem? What's at the core of hell? Yes, at the core of hell is Satan. And he has these huge bat wings like a bat, that are constantly flat, but he can't move. The core of hell is intensely cold in Dante's Inferno. And in this place, Satan is constantly chewing on two people Dante sees as the great traitors of human history. He's chewing on Judas, and he's chewing Brutus. He's chewing Brutus and Judas eternally. He's chewing them. And this is, what is Satan doing in this cold core of hell, as his wings flap, kind of futilely. He's crying. He's constantly crying in this core of hell. That's how, for ancient people, hell was this separation from God. That was hell. Being separate from God. It wasn't the torture part. It was just being separate from God. Being alone. Being completely alone. And that's what Jesus is experiencing. He is experiencing that complete, absolute, total aloneness. And you, Peggy, you said about expectations that it would come down. When he says, Lama, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, people think, because, it sort of sounds like it, that he's doing what?
Pleading for his life.
Well, no, even more dramatic than that. What Mark tells us is some people are thinking when they hear him shout this, Elijah, that he is calling for Elijah. And why would they assume that he's calling for Elijah? Lama, Elijah, sort of sounds a little alike. Why would they think he's calling for Elijah? What made Elijah special? Only 2 people ever went through the experience of Elijah. What is it about Elijah?
He descends.
Enoch was the other one. Enoch and Elijah.
They didn't die before they...
These are 2 people that didn't die. And remember, Elijah was carried up into heaven in that fiery chariot when Elisha's looking. And Elijah sends his mantle, his cloak, to Elisha to carry on his tradition, but he never dies. And so what the Jews, since he never dies in the stories, what the Jews expected, and they did the same thing with Enoch, what the Jews expected is what? Before the end, Elijah would come. This would be the sign of the end. That's why the transfiguration is such a big deal. That Elijah was there with Moses. That's why when they asked, who do people say that I am? Elijah was one of them. Because Elijah, they expected to come back before the end. Because he never died. So they're assuming, some people there are assuming that, so there must be some people that are looking for, that maybe Jesus is the Christ. He is the Christus, the liberator of Israel. Because right now he's calling down Elijah, and what is Elijah going to do? He's going to come down, take Jesus off the cross. Boom! Jesus is going to be the Christ. He's going to lead a revolution, destroy the Romans because he's fighting God, with God's army, and Israel would be reestablished. The end times would come. The dead would be raised. This was the beginning of the end, right? And there are Jews that thought that because they assume he's calling for Elijah, and what do? They run and grab. What do they grab? They grab a stick with sponge, and what's in that sponge? The wine mixed with opium, with gold, because Jesus looks like he's in pretty bad shape, right? We're going to keep him alive, because if we can keep him alive for just a little while, what's going to happen? Elijah's going to come down and he's going to save him, so we're going to keep him alive and see what's going to happen. Now, these Jews have completely, totally, absolutely missed it. Because the Christ isn't going to come off the cross. Because that's not what the Christ came to do. So, and in fact, so they run and get that, but before he can do anything, what happens? He dies. Jesus dies. And as soon as he dies, what occurs?
The veil in the temple.
The veil in the temple is torn. Why is that significant? That separation between God and humanity was ripped. Because that curtain in the temple separated the holy of holies, where God dwelt with the ark, and where the people lived. And now that separation is gone. It's torn. And at the cross, who's there? You got a centurion, a Roman officer. And what happens with that Roman officer?
And he was truly dishonored God. He's telling him to dismiss your spirit.
But what it says, what did Mark say? He says he saw him, when he saw him die. When he
How he died.
How he died? Well, how did he die? How did he die?
First guy died quickly.
He died quickly? How did he die? What did Mark tell us about how he died?
He didn't.
Yeah.
Well, he told us that he shouted out. You know, he was mocked. He shouted out, my God, why have you forsaken me? He sure did that, right? And then he shouted again and died. Now, you think this is how he died. Most people would respond by saying, would you describe this as a noble death? I don't think so. You know, if somebody says his last words are, my God, why have you forsaken me? My God, where are you? Why have you let me down? I don't know that people would say, oh yeah, those are great words of, oh wow. Oh, those are words to write down. This was not a noble death. You know, it's certainly not like in Luke. Last words in Luke were what? God, to you I release my spirit. Wow. That sounds pretty good, right? In John, last words. It is finished. Wow, that's pretty good. My God, why have you forsaken me? Ah! Dead. And yet, it's when it says, when the centurion saw how he died. That's when he says something that no human being in the Gospel of Mark has said. And what does the centurion say? Truly, he was the Son of God. Truly, he was the Son of God. Now remember, I told you earlier before, one of the really cool things in Mark, because I love Mark's structure, is he tells us what he's going to tell us at the very first verse. This is the gospel of Jesus, colon, Christ, comma, Son of God. And he spends half the gospel up to 8:23 talking about who Jesus is as the Christ. And that's why at the end of that section, Peter says, you are the Christ. You know, Caesarea Philippi. And then he starts talking about his suffering and death, and, Peter doesn't understand that. And now we've got the end of the second part where the centurion says, Son of God. This is how he shows he's the Son of God. How does he show he's the Son of God? Because he dies like... How does he die?
Peacefully.
He dies like us. He dies like us. Mm-hmm. He dies like us. He doesn't die like a god. He dies like us. And when you look at how the Jews saw the resurrection as the source of human hope, that is really important. Because since Jesus died like us, when he was raised, that gives us hope. Because he was the one who dies like us. When he was raised like we will be. Like we will be. And for Mark, that is a huge deal. That Jesus dies like us. For Mark, the resurrection is an afterthought. That's a postlude in Mark. This is what's really important. Right here. And after he dies, though, who's looking at the distance? So he's dead, right? He's dead. But finally we've got somebody, a foreigner, a Gentile, recognizing that he is the Son of God. Remember in Matthew, centurion says the same thing, but it says Jesus dies, and what happens after he dies in Matthew? All heck breaks loose. The sun is gone, and graves open and dead people are walking around the city. And, and it says when the centurion saw these things, he said. So this is a cosmic event. In Luke, the centurion says, truly he was a righteous man or an innocent man. So what we've got is different. And John is the one where the centurion puts the spear in it. And it's a mixture of blood and water, which is a good baptismal, Lord's Supper image. Blood and water. So we've got this nice little sacramental image in John. But that's not the case in Mark. It's a suffering Christ that we see. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that this soldier states that he's the Son of God right after the opening of the temple, the veil. I mean, it's like it's letting you know that the Gentiles are actually coming in at that point.
Well, right.
Into
yes,
the kingdom.
and remember, one of the things I said, and I think this is underneath everything that goes on in Mark, is Mark is really trying to knock some of these disciples off their little pedestals. Because later people think, oh, Peter, John, John said it must be true. And he's kind of knocking them off the pedestal. It's a Roman soldier that says, it's not Peter looking up and saying, oh, he's the Son of God. What does Peter do? Well, he's crying. He's hiding somewhere crying. The guy is still running with no clothes on. He's now made it to, he's in Caesarea now, because he's been running all night. These guys are not, they are the ones that say it. It's this Roman soldier. All right, but we still got some folks left. Who's hanging out? Who's in the distance?
Women!
Yay! Give women a round of applause! Woo! Women are there, right? And they are. Why are there women there?
Because they're true and honest.
Because they are true and honest, and men are a big bunch of nothing, and they run away. Which shows how unrealistic it is. Now, the men have completely disappointed. The women are there, and he names them, right? And what happens after Jesus dies?
Preparation.
Okay, they say, well, he's dead. We're going to bury him.
Now this second Mary that's in Mark, is that not Jesus' mother?
Maybe.
The mother of James the younger and of Jose and
Salome.
Which in another gospel,
Yeah.
that's a sister.
Yeah, could be.
His mother disappeared for a while.
Well, Mark.
Clear up until the crucifixion.
Right. Well,
Well,
the thing with Mark. Remember, early on, his family shows up. His mother shows up in Mark, but not by name. Shows up to talk to him. And in Mark, she's trying to, she's there. And Jesus kind of disses him. He says, well, who's my brothers? Who's my mother? Y'all are. Not her. Y'all. So Mary, or his mother in Mark, plays a different role than she'll play in like Luke and John. She's going to be a far more central. She's going to probably play the most important role in Luke, because she's going to be one of the early disciples. I mean, she's going to be there. She's going to be there. His mother. Mark is kind of nebulous, but part of the reason for that is what he's going to do with her at the end, because this isn't really the end. They get his body. Guy named Joseph says, "I got an empty, I got a cave. Why don't you use it? It hasn't been used before." So they say, okay. And they wrap him up, but it's very careful to note when they wrap him up, they don't embalm him. It says they just use linen, and they toss him into the hole. Now, really important that the Jews believe that 3 was again important for the Jews, that when you throw a guy in a grave, there was one way to be sure that the person in the hole was dead. Wait 3 days. And if he wasn't dead when he went in the hole, he's going to be dead later. You know. And I mean, that's what they did. That's why with Lazarus and John, 3 days, John says, he's been in there 3 days, not 2, because 2 days, possibility of being resuscitated, I would imagine, well, good night. That's where you get, and that happened late, that's where you get all these vampire stories, because you had dead people walking around, people saying, oh, sure, he died. Well, you thought he died. He was close, but he didn't die. And and if you dig your way out of a grave, I think you're going to be kind of crazy, So you're kind of nuts a little bit. And they would dig up and see scratch marks on the lid of the casket. This was Edgar Allan Poe was terrified. He was terrified of being buried alive. And there was a nice...
Yeah, me too. I think about that.
Yeah, well, you should, Henry.
I can imagine it now. You know how the old English, they had the bells?
Yeah.
I'm laying there and all of a sudden I come to.
Ring the bell.
Someone here said.
There was a whole business of stuff that you could put in a casket. To let people know.
Yes.
It reminds me of the Monty Python movie when they say, bring out the dead, and he says, well, I'm not dead yet. Yes, you are. Yes, he is. So the Jews believe 3 days, your spirit, they would say, oh, your spirit, because it's spirit, not soul. Your spirit, because the spirit is that energizing part from God, gift of God, that causes you to live. The spirit is going back to God. And then you are dead. So they put him in a hole, wrap him with linen, and they watched. Now, after they watched for a little bit in 16, because the gospel only has 7 more verses in it. They watch it from a distance, right? 3 days later, they do what? Okay, they're going to come to the tomb. Because it's okay now, to do something because, but Mark emphasizes that what has happened before they get there. It says it in our verses. We're at the tomb, there's a big rock in front of them. And they're thinking, who's going to roll the rock away? We got kind of a problem, right? And so the women are there, and what happens in Mark? The rock is gone. Now, we don't have, like in Matthew, angels not sitting on the rock and Roman soldiers around. Because Mark, that's nothing like that in Mark. It's just he's just a hole. And the rock is away, and the women say, huh. Yeah, assume somebody has stolen the body. And they go in, and there's a guy there. A young guy there, right? And he says, don't be alarmed. Okay, he says certain things. He gives them some commands, because that's a command, that's an imperative. Don't be alarmed. Don't be shook.
Don't be surprised.
Yeah, don't be surprised. And then, he says what? Okay, you're looking for Jesus. Crucified, yeah. He's not here, he's raised. And then the young man says what? Go. He gives them a command. Really clear command. Go and tell Peter and the disciples. Now that's kind of interesting. Because remember, we had the disciples do what? Run away. And Peter denies, right? And Judas betrays him. But he doesn't say go and tell Judas and Peter and the disciples. He says tell Peter and the disciples. In other words, Peter has been forgiven. So tell Peter, the disciples forgiven, Judas not so much. And Jesus already said that. Better for, him never to be born, the one who betrays him. All right, so the women get commands. If they're taking notes, the young man says, go and tell Peter and the others. Okay. Go and tell Peter and the others. And so the women do what? They leave the tomb, and they got that list in front of them. They put it into their phones, and they got it right there, right? Got it right there. Go and tell Peter. Go and tell Peter. Okay, got it. And they do what? They tell no. Because they were afraid. And remember, the angel said, sort of, don't be afraid. Go and tell Peter and the others. And in reverse order, Mark says they told nobody because they were afraid. So the angel said, do these two things, and the women don't do either one. So in the end, who is on the Lord's side? Who will serve the king? Nobody. Now, Mark is writing to an audience of Christians, right? Therefore, what? Somebody told them. And they know this story. So somebody told them. I think Mark, what he does is really, really cool. And he's done it before in his gospel. And he's doing it now. What I think he's given us is, he's given us the end. And understand, this made people really uncomfortable. And that's why at the end of Mark, you've got two endings. Because somebody read this, it's, they're reading this. And especially since it's the last word. You know the last word in the Gospel of Mark? It's really cool. The last word in the Gospel of Mark.
Amen.
Well, not amen. But I mean the last word in the short ending, the one that ends in verse 7. Last word. Now we think it's afraid because that's the way we phrase sentences. But in Greek, the last word in the Gospel of Mark, and this is crazy, is the word on the edge of your seat. Come on, get on the edge of your seat. Okay. I don't need horses. The last word in the Gospel of Mark, the last word Mark writes is a Greek word we have talked about when we were studying Paul, talked about it all the time, is the Greek word gar. Is the Greek word gar. And the Greek word gar means for. The last word in the Gospel of Mark is for. For they were afraid. See, with the Greeks, F-O-R, yes. When the Greeks do their sentences, when they write the sentences, the position of the words in the sentence words are positioned in sentence for emphasis. In other words, if the writer wants you to focus on fear, he'll put fear at the beginning of the sentence. If he wants you to focus on something else, he'll put that at the beginning of the sentence. Grammatically, the word gar can't be at the beginning. It can't be the first word in the sentence. So it's got to be second or later. And what the writer has done is the writer wants afraid to be emphasized, but ends with the word gar. So it ends with a preposition. And that doesn't make any sense. And that's why later writers read this and said, they were reading it. Oh, for the women were afraid. Honey, did you see any more pages of that gospel I was reading? You must have moved it. You must have moved it somewhere. I had it right here. That never happens, right? Oh, yeah. Why did you move the keys out of my pocket? Where? That's what he's saying. That's what the guy says. And she says, shut up. Which sometimes my wife yells at me. But that's neither here nor there. And he said, well, man, I've lost a page of the Gospels. Well, the only thing I can do is to write my own and pass it on and say, oh yeah, this is what I got. And that's what they do. They write two endings, to fill it, because it can't end now. For one, you got no appearances. And everybody knows Jesus appeared, right? So I'm going to write an appearance. And so then you got two endings. Now, there is zero chance that Mark wrote those two endings. Zero. because the language is different. He uses words, and the words are used in the two endings that are used nowhere in Mark. The sentence structure is different. The writing style is just plain different. Mark is easy. His writing style is easy to identify because his writing style is very, very bad. His style is horrible. It's really awkward. His stuff. Luke is beautiful. John is Dick and Jane Greek. Anybody can read John. John's really easy to read. Sort of Dick and Jane Greek. But Mark is very awkward. He does weird things. I mean, that you're not allowed to do. Luke does weird things, but they're really sophisticated. Mark is just a mess. His is just a mess. And the endings are too good. They're just too good. They're written too well. And they use language that isn't used elsewhere. So somebody tacked the ends on. I think even though Mark's writing style was very awkward, which would tell us that and he may be dictating it anyway, that this isn't what he does for a living, right? In terms of structure, I think his is by far the most sophisticated. Mark's structure is brilliant. I think at the end, what he leaves us with a challenge. Because in the Gospel of Mark, everybody has failed Jesus. Everybody. Now, we believe in Jesus, so somehow we hurt. But Mark doesn't care about how we hurt. Everybody has failed Jesus. I think Mark's point is, you've read the Gospel, everybody's failed Jesus. Now, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Now it's up to you. This story is done. What are you going to do? Now, I also think Mark expected the coming of Jesus to be pretty fast, pretty soon. So you don't need the appearance because when Jesus appears, the end is here. So it's the later Gospels written maybe 20 years after Mark, or 25 years, that you have appearances, and then certainly Luke with an ascension, that we're going to be around for a while. The situation's changed. But Mark, I think, is wonderful. What are you going to do? You've heard the story. What are you going to do? And that's, to me, really, really cool. I find that as exciting as any. Maybe more exciting than the other four. The other four are wonderful. But this ending is, gosh, this is good. This is good stuff. All right, any questions? Easter. Coming up. Now, I need a volunteer. We're gonna have to crucify somebody. Think about it. Yeah. Ray, do you volunteer Ray? Okay, Debbie volunteers Ray. I was thinking of Sue because she's so relaxed. The only trouble, we couldn't do either Sue or Chris because I don't think we could find a cross small enough. It'd be like this tall. So it'd be kind of a shame. What's that?
Cross for children.
That's a children's cross. Yeah. You know what the Romans called it? Junior cross. Let's have a word of prayer. Lord God, thank you so much for giving us this time together, and remind us that we still face the same challenge. In light of what Jesus has done, we are now challenged to consider what we're going to do about it. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. Now I am going to say